We have mentioned many times this morning how the Columbia faculty are critical to the success of our students. There is no better example of this than our valedictorian, Maxwell Bertolero. Maxwell, who hails from the Bay Area, will tell you himself about his own challenging path to GS. But I want to add on Maxwell's behalf how grateful he is to one particular faculty member who has been an incredible mentor to him. When Professor Daphna Shohami of the Department of Psychology received the prestigious Lenfest Teaching Award this fall, she chose Maxwell to be the student who would speak about her as a teacher and mentor. Professor Shohame, he said, helped me see that thoughtful neuroscience research can tell us what it means to be human and make a genuine difference. She helped me develop the analytic skills required to do that type of neuroscience research and helped foster a confidence in my intellectual abilities that I lacked. Maxwell completed his degree requirements in December, and Professor Shohame offered him the opportunity to do research with her during the spring semester while he waited to hear back from PhD programs. He was very excited by the opportunity, but he writes, "What brought tears to my eyes as I read her email in Avery Library is that she said she wanted me to work with her because I think like a scientist. After spending my adolescence not being intellectually respected, to have someone not only praise my work, but also praise the way I think was overwhelming." This tribute to Professor Daphna Shohame could, I am sure, be repeated by many of you about your own faculty mentors. And I am sure that you will see the powerful result of this transformative engagement between student and mentor in our valedictorian and his words. Maxwell Bertolero is not only a brilliant scientist, but a passionate humanist, a man of integrity and compassion. I hope, he said, that one day I can do what Daphna did for me for someone else. Maxwell Bertolero graduates with a double major in honors in psychology and philosophy, higher than an A average, summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, and a member of the GS Honors Society. He is the only graduating senior in the country to be accepted to work towards his PhD in the research laboratory of the eminent cognitive neuroscience at the University of California, Berkeley, Professor Mark Desposito. It is a privilege for me to present to you the valedictorian of the class of 2012, Maxwell Bertolero.
Before I start, I just want to thank Dean On for those kind words, everything he's done for me and for general studies as a program. If you've ever come into contact with him, even through an email, I'm sure you know that he's a lovely human being. So, round of applause for Dean On. President Bollinger, Provost Coatsworth, Executive Vice President Dirks, General Casey, Dean On, families, friends, and fellow graduates. Think back to what you were doing 9 years ago. Give you a second. So none of the memories we just conjured up forecast us graduating from Columbia today. 9 years ago, I was so depressed and anxious that I could barely function, and I had grown disgusted with high school, both socially and academically. I pleaded with my high school deans to let me take some time off, but they threatened that I would be expelled if I was not at school the next day. And then I would never get into a good college I would never get a good job. I would never be happy. I would be labeled hyperactive, undisciplined, over-emotional. The next day, I drove to school, but every time I reached for the door handle, I was paralyzed, just completely overcome with tears. I could not get out of my car. There was so much pressure to fit a mold, I just did not fit. And continuing to try to shove myself into that mold was hopeless. So I grabbed on to the only thing I enjoyed doing at the time, a sport called motocross, which is racing dirt bikes around tracks composed of hills, turns, jumps, and bumps. When I was floating 90 feet through the air, with my heart a hummingbird, my anxiety and depression could not touch me. So, when my friends finished high school, I moved to the Southern California desert, which is the epicenter of the sport, in order to pursue a career racing dirt bikes. I spent 5 years of my life completely dedicated to making a living racing. I got beat a lot, I broke a lot of bones, but I learned that completely dedicating myself to something I am passionate about and letting it consume me makes me happy. But one can't race motocross forever, and despite my somewhat troubled academic history, I always had a passion for learning. So my mom suggested I take just one class. I started studying philosophy at Orange Coast Community College. I was terrified, but I applied what I had learned from racing to academics. I studied what I was passionate about and I let it consume me. And it worked. The next thing I knew, I was a Columbia student. And now I'm standing up here. All of our convoluted, complicated, and messy paths to this moment are far from recommended. Usually, if you don't fit, Usually, if you don't fit the norm, if you deviate even once from the traditional path, it's expected that you won't be successful. You certainly won't end up here. But we made it here because GS knows that progress most often results from deviations from the norm. And the world needs more educated people who are not afraid to deviate from the norm. That's us. As a result of this opportunity and our hard work, we are some of the most educated rule breakers in the world. As Noam Chomsky says, opportunity confers responsibility. With our remarkable past and our amazing education comes an even greater responsibility. We came here not afraid to think differently, and we have to continue to think differently to blaze new paths and really embody the values that GS saw in us when they invited us here. But we also have to use the skill that is the defining value of our liberal arts education, the ability to control the way we think. We now have the ability to choose to think rationally and logically, even when it leads us to a result that seems grimmer than the result our intuitions deliver. As my symbolic logic professor, Achille Varzi, explained, learning to use logic frees one's mind from being bound by one's limited intuitions. My struggles with mental disease, my studies of philosophy and the brain, and my newfound ability to use reason and logic instead of intuition have led me to some counterintuitive and unconventional insights concerning human freedom. We all intuitively feel as if we freely will our thoughts and our actions, and we judge others' actions as freely willed. However, this intuitive belief is flawed. Fighting depression taught me that there are limits to our freedom. I couldn't simply will more serotonin in my brain. I couldn't just decide to be happy and have it happen. But people judged me as if I could. My high school attributed my troubles to character flaws, not chemical imbalances. Had an organ other than my brain been affected, I certainly would have been given time off to recover. My philosophical and scientific studies here have taught me that I am not an entity that is separate from and controls the workings of my brain. I am what my brain does. During my depression, I wasn't freely controlling the storm of activity in my brain. I wasn't lost in that storm. I was the storm. As Einstein explains, human beings in their thinking, feeling, and acting are not free agents, but are as causally bound as the stars are in their motion. We are all forced screaming into this world with random genetics set upon a path we didn't even choose. And for every choice we make, we can, in theory, trace a causal chain back to one's genetics and the path one was placed on at conception. It's an illusion that a person, what we each call I, is a separate entity that can alter this causal chain independent of the chain itself. We can't be an uncaused cause of our behavior. We simply perceive our thoughts and our behavior as such when the causes of them are obscure to us. So I'm not claiming that we're not in control of our decisions, of the way in which we think or our actions. And I'm not saying that our lives are predetermined, that we are fated, and we can just sit back and the same events will occur no matter what effort we put in or the decisions we make. I didn't show up to Columbia and say, well, I have a personal history that interacts well with my genetics, so I can just sit back, relax, and watch the perfect grades flow in. Trust me, that's not how it happened. I had to try extremely hard. But while I put in that effort, my ability to do so, to be motivated, to not fall back into depression, were not things I earned on my own. Had I been born with different genetics to a different family, or even had different events occur in my life, I could have failed miserably. As Charles Darwin explains, this view should teach one profound humility. One deserves no credit for anything, nor ought one to blame others. This does not mean that sometimes I don't feel a little tiny bit self-important given my accomplishments, or blame others for their actions. But I can choose to use reason and logic to override those flawed intuitions and emotions. Realizing that we are not completely free is scary, but as Bertrand Russell says, even though the open windows of science make us shiver after the comfortable indoor warmth of traditional humanizing myths, that fresh air brings vigor, and the great spaces of science have a grandeur all their own. The scientific view of human freedom leads us down a more pragmatic and empathetic path than does the myth of free will, as it views the brain as another organ that can break, but also that can be fixed, and promotes empathy, not blame, towards the person who is suffering. I have let neuroscience and philosophy consume me, and now I perceive everything, including human freedom, differently than I did before. I have loved this process, and I hope that my career as a scientist allows me to constantly see things differently than I did the day before, both inside and outside of the lab, and that I can discuss what I see with others in hopes of making the world a tiny bit better. To me, that is a source of happiness that feeds off itself, growing stronger every single day. This has been my development as a person. While your development was certainly different in content and conclusions, it was not different in methodology and opportunity. and we all share the same responsibility. We all have a logical, free, and fearless intellect, combined with a unique perspective given our past. From this opportunity flows the responsibility not to waste it, to use it to make the world a tiny bit better. It is unimaginably hard to do this, to stay actively conscious and logical, really thinking day in and day out, and to have the resulting insights motivate one's actions, especially when those actions are risky deviations from the norm. But if anyone can do this, we can. So we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be us, without the people who supported and nurtured us, as well as the people who tried to pull us down, but actually catapulted us to success. So I'm going to go thank my high school for kicking me out. And then thank my friends, family, and professors while we throw back a lot of whiskey. I encourage you to handle yourself in similar ways. Celebrate who you are and what you have done, but do it with some of the people who are responsible for your being who you are and accomplishing what you have done. Congratulations and good luck out there.